1948, John Northwood was casually walking to his car in a parking garage after a business meeting. But before he can unlock the door and get in, Doug, another business meeting attendee, comes up to him and says, "Hey man, I really hate to bug you, but can you just drive me around the block a few times?" John says, "Why do you need me to drive you around the block?" Doug, obviously shaken up, says, "There's a group of weird kids hanging around my car. They asked me for a ride, and I told them no, but now they won't leave. So I just want to go away until they leave." Strange request, but John agrees, and they climb into John's car and start making their way out of the parking garage. And as they get close to Doug's car, John can see why Doug might be a little nervous, as he sees 3 creepy-looking kids standing around dressed in what looks like gothic clothing. And as the 2 men drive by, a sudden feeling of breathtaking panic and fear overcomes them both, complete with premonitions that something bad is about to go down. Strangely, considering the level of fear that both men are currently experiencing, as they pass Doug's car, John has a sudden, uncontrollable compulsion to stop his car. And when he does, the youngest kid, a girl of maybe about 10, walks up to John's window and says, "It's scary out there all alone. We just want to ride home." That's when John and Doug see that the kids have solid black pools for eyes, a sight jarring enough to snap John out of the trance that he didn't even know he was in. And as his thoughts come crashing back to him, he puts the car in reverse, stomps on the gas, sending the car squealing backwards. And the kids give chase. John turns the car back around and speeds around the parking garage circle until he eventually makes it back down to the first floor, where one of the kids is waiting for them. John and Doug exchange a mutual WTF glance, as there is no way that kid should have been able to beat their car to the bottom. But they keep driving, race right past the kid, and exit the parking ramp. And when they do, the oppressive, all-consuming sense of dread that they felt subsided. And the 2 men just drive around for a while, until they finally summon up the courage to go back and see if the coast is clear. It is. And taking a deep breath, Doug gets out of the car, thanks John, hurries and gets into his car, eager to end this day. John backs his car up a little bit so that Doug can get out of his space. Doug backs up out of his space and heads toward the exit with John right behind him. And as he's about to pull out onto the street, John feels that same crushing feeling of looming disaster hit him again. And John watches as Doug pulls out into the street, rushes through a yellow light, and gets hit by a speeding truck, killing him instantly. And John, his head spinning, unable to wrap his mind over what just happened, starts looking around for someone to help. And there, not far off, hiding in the shadows, having witnessed that entire gruesome scene, are the 3 black-eyed children. One of the earliest accounts of an encounter with a black-eyed kid occurred in the 1950s in Virginia. It is not the earliest account of a black-eyed being, but it is the oldest one that I have found so far that includes all of the behaviors that we think of as a modern-day textbook black-eyed kid encounter. The story was told to author David Weatherly by a man whose hardworking family of farmers and fishermen had lived in rural Virginia for generations, and whose clan lore included this story about one of their kin, Harold. A 16-year-old boy at the time, Harold was walking home just before sunset. As he reaches the fence line that leads to his house, he comes across another boy, 10, 12 years old, leaning on the fence post. And Harold is a little perplexed. His family lives in a pretty small town, and he knows pretty much every face in it. But Harold is one of those rare individuals who can talk to and then make friends with just about anybody. So in true Harold fashion, he tries to strike up a conversation with the young man, who continues to stare at the dirt road under his feet, totally unresponsive to anything Harold has to say. Being unaccustomed to the lack of conversational engagement, Harold starts to wonder if something's wrong. "Hey, are you okay?" And the boy responds,
"I want to go to your house. You're going to walk me up to your house."
Why would a strange kid want to come to my house? Harold thinks to himself as a chill starts running through his body. And as Harold is trying to comprehend his body's primal fear response, the boy looks up at him, revealing solid black eyes. Harold's chills bloom into full-on fight or flight as he looks up the road toward his house. His legs feel locked in place, but his brain is calculating how long of a run it is from here to his front door. As if reading his mind, the boy blurts out,
"Now don't you walk away from me. You're gonna walk me up to your house."
The threatening vibe from the boy's statement is enough to kick Harold into gear. He turns and runs away, faster than he has ever run in his life. Halfway up the road, he hears a scream behind him. A wild scream, guttural, like that of a bobcat. That sound pushes Harold to pick up his legs and run even faster, convinced that the boy is coming to get him. Once Harold hits the front door, he lurches inside and slams the door behind him. His mom, seeing him all out of breath, asks, "What's wrong?" So he tells his parents all about his strange run-in with the boy. Harold's father immediately grabs his shotgun and goes outside looking for the menacing boy, but he doesn't see a thing. So he comes back inside, and Harold's parents say, "Okay, tell us again what happened." So Harold does, ending with the statement that the boy was as solid as you or me, so he knows it wasn't a ghost. Now, knowing that their boy is not one to make up tales, they believe his story. And Harold's father really doesn't know what to make of it. He's heard about some pretty strange things happening way out there in the country, but nothing as bizarre as this. And Harold's mother firmly believes that he has had an encounter with the devil himself. She has Harold change into his Sunday best, and she promptly takes him to church for a blessing. Later in life, Harold would tell his children that he always tried to forget the boy, but he could never get the image out of his head. Those eyes, they haunted me. This story comes to us from a man named JC. We are going to call him Jordan. Now, Jordan never really paid much attention to the black-eyed kid phenomena. He went through a phase as a teenager where he studied almost everything paranormal he could get his hands on, so he had heard the usual stories. And the creepy Photoshop pictures of freaky kids seemed to be everywhere online, but he just swiped right by them, chalking them up to an urban legend. These days, he's pretty much a skeptic where spectacular creature phenomena are concerned. Or he was. Recently, Jordan was driving, listening to some really old podcast about black-eyed kids and their original internet post from Abilene, and he almost wrecked his truck. The story is so similar to an experience that he and his boyfriend Craig had a few years ago. Jordan was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, on a date with his new boyfriend Craig. It's actually their first date, even though they met online over a year ago and have been an official couple for 4 months already. And they decided it was about damn time to meet face to face and decide on a weekend in Baton Rouge for a National College Football Championship, a little bit of partying, and hanging out in general. Their first night there, they decide to see a movie and get to the theater about an hour early so they can make sure that they get good seats. They get their tickets, and still having some time to kill, they decide to walk across the street to the Mall of Louisiana and take a quick look around and do some window shopping. And it's kind of late. It's about 7:30 or so in the evening, so most of the shops are closed. But they decide to go anyway, and if nothing else, just to walk around and stretch their legs. And they've just crossed the street at the crosswalk, right between the theater and the bowling alley arcade, when it happens. They never see them walk up, which is odd because Jordan really has a hyper-focused sense of observation. He grew up in a really bad environment, and he learns early to take note of everyone and everything, no matter if he thinks someone is a threat or not, just in case. Jordan and Craig, who is younger than him and also kind of a smaller guy, have just made it to the other side of the street when, seemingly out of nowhere, two boys approach them. One looks to be about 16 and the other is about 12 or 13, both of them Caucasian in appearance. And it's just light enough outside to still be able to see that the older one has either brown or sandy blonde hair and the younger one's got brown hair. Jordan's first impression is that their clothes are kind of weird. They look like kind of Abercrombie, kind of Hollister clothes a typical suburban kid might wear, but from the mid-90s, kind of faded almost. The older boy starts talking and immediately creeps Jordan out.
Do you have a car?
He just walks up to Jordan and asks that. But Jordan is a nice guy, and other than the weird feeling that something is a little off, despite it being such an odd question, he decides to answer. At this point, Craig is beside Jordan and slightly behind to his left because he's following Jordan as they're walking and talking. But both stop because of how weirded out they both feel this situation is. Jordan looks at Craig and he has his head down and moves behind Jordan. Jordan is a bigger guy and he can tell Craig is pretty much using him as a human shield. Craig doesn't scare easily. He has never backed down from a fight, and this particular trait has gotten him into trouble before. But now he is hiding behind Jordan. When he sees Jordan looking at him, he raises his head, shakes his head no before putting his head back down. He also isn't on his phone, which is weird because he had just been in the middle of a lively Snapchat conversation like a minute ago. Jordan looks back at the boys, and neither of them has moved. Now, he doesn't know why he decided to answer their question because his first instinct is to lie and get Craig away from there. But he tells them, well, not really. I mean, I have a rental. It's parked over there. And points to the movie theater parking lot.
Can you give us a ride?
Despite the complete sense of uneasiness Jordan has and the extremely strong sense that they do not need to be anywhere near his car, he's curious. Jordan had been a youth pastor and a youth addiction counselor in the past. So when he sees a kid in need, his first instinct is always to help him out and figure out what's going on. Where do you need to go?
We came to the mall, but we need to get back to our house. It's not far from here. Our parents will be mad if we don't get back.
Well, why don't you call them? Maybe they can give you a ride. Despite their average appearance, Jordan is dead set against giving them a ride and notices popping up in his head images of maniacal smiles and his throat being slit from behind. This time, the younger one chimes in.
We don't have phones.
Jordan has a habit of scanning his surroundings, so he looks up to see if other people milling around are trying to get past them on the sidewalk, or looking at the strange conversation of men in the middle of the busy thoroughfare. But just as he looks up, he hears the younger one say,
They're not paying attention.
Jordan hears him say. He never sees him speak, despite standing not even 3 feet from him and his face being very much in Jordan's field of vision. And he's pretty sure the kid is speaking to his brother. The brother looks at him and Jordan hears,
They can help us.
And looking back at Jordan,
They can see us.
Jordan thinks this is odd, but he is more concerned with finding a polite end to the conversation and seeing these boys safely on their way. I really wish I could help you, but there's all kinds of stuff in my backseat and we have to get to a movie soon.
It won't take long. It's not far.
Jordan barely manages to notice that the rest of the people at the mall look kind of washed out, like they're not really there, when he sees the kid's eyes for the first time. They are the palest shade of green. Yep, odd for a black-eyed kid story, but stick with me. His eyes, though Jordan can see them, are kind of ethereal, almost not really there, almost transparent, like ghost eyes. They have bits of yellow in them, maybe even turn blue. He's not really sure, but they are hypnotizing. Jordan sees fear in his eyes, not the "I'm about to die" fear, but the "I need serious help" fear. The fear a kidnap victim might feel, or a lost kid. The older boy looks at the younger boy again.
Yeah, he can see us. Ask him for help. He can help us.
Jordan is totally sketched out by now, and he just wants to leave. I can't give you a ride, but you said it's not far. Can you walk? Or do you want to use my phone to call your parents?
They're not home. They're still at work. It's too far to walk. Couple of miles.
By now, Jordan is desperate to get away. The sense of urgency to help is getting too strong, and he doesn't like it because every time he thinks about helping, he gets a stronger sense that he's going to be murdered. He just knows that if he even survives the trip to their house, he will be invited in and he won't be able to refuse. Their parents will be inside and it will be bad. Craig isn't even a thought at this point, except that he's so close behind Jordan that Jordan can actually feel his presence. They have to go. I can maybe give you a couple of bucks for bus fare. The bus stop is right there.
We just moved here. We don't know the bus stops. We just need a ride.
Where are you from?
Far away.
Look, I wish I could help you, but we've got to go. And with that, Jordan starts to walk away, making sure that Craig is behind him. And they walk fast. Jordan turns around about 5 seconds later to look at these two weirdos and make sure that they're not following, and they're gone. Craig is pissed. I can't believe you just did that. Did what? Talk to them. What? They needed our help. They were messed up. What, you mean high? Their pupils weren't dilated. No, they didn't have pupils. They were messed up. I didn't see anything. I can't believe you didn't see anything. I'm telling you, they were messed up. That's why I didn't say anything, and I'm not crazy. I know what I saw. Jordan believes him, kind of. He tries to joke around about their weird attitudes and the insistence on getting in his car. But Craig gets even more upset. Just stop. Stop talking about it. I'm done. I'm not crazy. So Jordan drops it until he hears that story about black-eyed kids on the podcast. He calls up Craig and asks him, "Those guys at the mall back in Baton Rouge, did they have black eyes?" Yeah. And that's all he would say. He's still too scared to talk about it. But looking back, Jordan remembers that weekend. It was bad. Jordan and Craig argued about trivial stuff, and they almost broke up. Craig even developed a nosebleed that night. After he went to bed, Jordan almost went nuts. He drove across town full of this unexplainable angst and stopped at one of the riverboat casinos, the Belle of Baton Rouge. Out on the top deck, Jordan looked down into the water and had this strong urge to throw himself into the Mississippi. It was raining and the water looked rough, and he knew that if he did that, he wouldn't survive. But thankfully, he was able to resist the urge. But that's not even the end. In the weeks that followed, Jordan almost had a nervous breakdown. He was having issues at work that almost cost him his job, and he and Craig almost broke up again. He finally got desperate enough that he went to a psychic who helped him do a cleansing. And things which had slowly been spiraling into an abyss started improving. And a pagan witch friend of his, who was way more experienced at dealing with the paranormal than Jordan, told him these are spirits of kids who were horribly abused in life. Maybe the sins you commit in this life do come back in the next. Trish is in love, but that's the problem. She and Jeff have been together on and off since they were in high school. And as they got older and actually started adulting, things got more stable and they were on more than they were off. And that's just kind of where they stayed for the first half of their 20s. The problem part is that Trish and Jeff are that couple that everybody knows shouldn't be together, but nobody can help but watch the train wreck as it's happening. Trish and Jeff love each other. They're just not good for each other. But like a moth to the flame, no matter what happens, they return to each other over and over again. Of course, the fact that their two families are like family to each other doesn't help matters. Trish is really close to her mom, so every time she comes to her for advice, her mom, thinking that with age comes wisdom and that Trish is short on both, tells her that not all relationships come easy and that sometimes you have to put in some work, maybe go get some counseling. And it's not that her mom is blind to the toxicity between the two of them, but she has seen how good they can be together. And they're both such great people, and she believes that they can both rise above their issues and be happy together. Now, eventually, Trish decides this is all just too much, and she just needs to end this relationship. And it's not pretty. They don't go to fisticuffs or anything like that with each other. There's no abuse, but there's so much anger and resentment that has built up between the two of them that when the proverbial straw breaks the proverbial camel's back, much to the dismay of not only them but their families, it goes down hard. Now, Trish's mom keeps telling her to take whatever me time she needs, but don't shut the door on this relationship. She says, I know if you guys work hard, you can save it. And Trish is thinking, whose side are you on? She just felt not heard and betrayed by her own mother. She can't believe her own mother is siding with Jeff, and that she can't see how much Jeff has hurt her, how dysfunctional their relationship has become, and that it's no longer good for either of them. She feels bad because she knows her mom likes Jeff so much, but she's her daughter. So Trish stops talking to her. So mother and daughter don't speak for a good couple of months, but that all changes one day when Trish's sister calls and says, hey, just thought you might want to know, Mom's really sick, like terminal sick. Now, Trish has been working really hard to put her relationship with Jeff behind her. She hasn't talked to him, she's blocked his number, she's blocked him on every social media platform she can think of. And instead spends the next year and a half channeling all of her energy into her mother and making sure that her mother is okay, or as okay as she can be. As the end is nearing, Trish tries to treat every day as a gift and soak in every memory before it's too late. So unfortunately, Trish's mom passes away. And just like everyone does when someone we love passes away, we play the what if game, and Trish is no different. She keeps asking herself, what if I hadn't stopped talking to her? Was she so worried about me that it made her sick? Did she know I was just frustrated with her for not backing me up? Did she know how much I loved her? And of course, anger is a normal part of the grieving process. But Trish isn't angry with her mother. She's angry with Jeff. If things with Jeff hadn't gone down the way that they did, things wouldn't have been the way that they were between her and her mother. It's Jeff's fault she lost those 6 months not talking to her mom that she now desperately wants back. But a moth will always go back to the flame. So Trish would be angry with him, but then the switch would flip and she would find herself wanting to call him, to tell him about her mom, knowing that her mom would want him to know. Not sure if she had drawn her lines so well, if Jeff had even heard the news. But she decided, nope, I drew this line. It's not really fair to either of us for me to change the rules now. She hasn't spoken to him in over 2 years at this point, and she feels like if she opens that Pandora's box, who knows what old wounds are going to open up again. Let what is buried stay buried. It's time for her to move on and go find happiness for herself. A couple of years go by with Trish missing her mom every day, and she notices that whenever she needs her the most, she has a dream where her mom visits her and tells her exactly the thing she needs to hear. She's always been a pretty spiritual person, but now she starts believing in signs and dreams, feeling as though her mother is truly communicating with her. And it gets to the point where anytime Trish feels like she needs advice from her mom, she says a prayer before bed, asking for her mom's help. More often than not, she gets a response. As the years go by, the memory of Jeff is fading. The anger towards him is fading. In fact, she doesn't think of him much at all anymore. Until one day, 4 years since the last time they talked, he pops into her head. And this time it's different. She doesn't feel the weight on her shoulders or the ache in her heart anymore. She feels forgiveness. She feels kindness. She actually starts remembering the good times without the shadow of the bad. She doesn't want him back again. That ship has sailed. She has zero trouble now that she has some time and some distance admitting that they were toxic together, but she can also admit that sometimes they were also pretty good together. And with the wisdom of a few more years under her belt, she can now understand why her mom was so insistent that they get therapy, get counseling, work through it. It's not that her mom was minimizing the bad, but that she believed in the good. And that realization makes her miss her mom that much more. But Trish has closed that chapter. A couple more years go by, and it's about 6 years since she's spoken with Jeff. And in the time she's been away from him and has been without her mom, she finally starts to get a sense of who she is. For so long, she felt like her life was someone else's plan. But now that everything has slowed down and she only has herself to think about, she finally figures out what she wants. She wants a quiet, peaceful life. So she moves into a new place, a tiny little house just a little out of town, surrounded by forests and creeks and farmland. This is the life she always dreamed of. Now here is where things start to get interesting. About 6 months after moving into her new home, she gets a text message from some random number. And this text message claims to be Jeff reaching out. Trish decides not to answer that text. In fact, she's a little perturbed because since they broke up, she's gotten a new number. Obviously, he has two since she doesn't recognize the one she's looking at. But how did he get it? And that is not the last message. Over the next couple of weeks, she receives several more apologetic messages from Jeff. Messages that don't even really sound like Jeff. Then again, it's been over 6 years since she talked to him, so a person can change quite a bit in 6 years. She doesn't put a whole lot of thought into it. She's just happy for him that he obviously is making some of his own soul-searching progress. And the messages he's sending are unbelievable. He's apologizing for every toxic behavior that he has displayed during their relationship. He's atoning for things that are very specific, things that only he and her would know. The kind of dirty laundry that no couple airs to anyone. And he's telling her that she's the most beautiful, incredible, wonderful woman that he's ever met. And he wishes he could have been better for her, that they could have been better together. But now, all he wants is for her to be happy and safe. And he even tells her, "I'm sorry about your mom, but she's always watching over you." That particular message shocks her a bit because she hasn't spoken to anybody who knows him who might turn around and tell him. And she certainly didn't tell him. But again, she just assumes that the gossip grapevine has longer vines than she can even guess. One evening, Trish is at home, a place she's always felt is her safe space. But this night is different. She feels restless. She's jumpy and paranoid, and every little sound, every little thing is making her internal alarms go off. She can't figure out why. Deciding she just needs to try and chillax a little bit, she puts on a rom-com, grabs a glass of wine, puts her phone on Do Not Disturb, and tries to relax this feeling out of her body. That's when her phone dings, even though she just put it on Do Not Disturb. Just a little freaked, she looks over, and it's a text from the supposed Jeff number again. When she opens the message, all it says is, "I love you, but I have to go. But I need you to know, whatever you do, do not answer your door tonight." And then another message comes in that says, "I'm sorry to say that this is my last message to you. Just know that I will always be there for you. And please never doubt how much I loved you." Now at this point, Trish is really kind of disappointed. She had been so happy for Jeff because it seemed like he'd had this major epiphany in his life that was leading him down a positive path. But these last two messages just hit her like this is some kind of major manipulation on his part, that he's just trying to get a reaction out of her because she hasn't responded to anything else so far. So with more than just a little bit of sadness, she decides to just delete the number, block it, and move on with her life. The last thing she wants at this point is to let him back into her head again. Now, Trish doesn't know if it's because of the text messages or if the messages are just adding to the problem, but she still has this weight in her chest, this ominous feeling of dread. But she puts her phone down and continues on with her movie. After it's over, she collects her wet tissues, downs the last bit of wine in her glass, and gets ready to go to bed. She shuts off the TV, shuts off the lights, and starts walking down the hall to her bedroom when she hears bang, bang, bang on her front door. She stops dead. She can hear her heart pounding, and even though she's trying to breathe as quietly as possible, she can hear the wind rushing in and out of her lungs, and she's just listening. A few seconds of quiet and bang, bang, bang on the door. Trish's mind is racing. She's thinking, who the hell could be at my door at this hour? Is it Jeff? Has he lost his mind? How could he even know where I live? How did he know someone was going to come to the door unless it's him? But then why would he tell me not to answer it? She decides not to answer it and starts walking toward her room again when she hears bang, 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 and then a voice. It's not Jeff's.
Can we come in?
Fear and confusion wash over her at the same time because not only is that voice not Jeff's voice, but it's a child's voice. Now, she hasn't lived there very long, but she has yet to see any kids around where she lives. Her whole neighborhood is full of recent empty nesters who are too young for grandchildren. So she slowly creeps her way towards a window that looks out toward the front door. All the lights are off, so they shouldn't be able to see her. Trish peeks out the window to see two children staring at the door, standing almost perfectly still. She hears,
"We know you're in there. Let us in."
She decides she needs to get a better look to see if there's some chance that she might know these kids or at least see what they're doing. So she walks toward the window next to the door and takes another peek. She wishes she hadn't. As soon as she's at the closer window and can see the two kids again, their faces, perfectly in sync like robots, turn directly towards her and stare. She can see immediately that they have very pale skin, very dark hair, and what looks like completely blacked out, soulless eyes. One of the kids says to her,
"We can see you're in there. Did he tell you not to let us in?"
Trish is terrified and feels like she's in some kind of horror movie. She runs to the kitchen, grabs her phone, and dials 911. The police do show up, but of course, there's no one around anymore. No kids, and the ground is all dewy grass and mud, but no footprints. So the cops are kind of thinking, what has she been smoking? Trish tries to explain everything about Jeff and the messages that he's been sending her and how he told her someone was going to come to the door. The cops ask to see the messages, but she can't show them because she deleted them and blocked the number. The police ask, well, it sounds like things didn't end too well with the two of you. Is there any chance he figured out where you live and is just messing with you? She tells them no, partly because she can't see how he would be able to figure out where she is, and partly because she just can't believe that he would be that vindictive. He's had 6 years to get back at her if he wanted to. Why start now? So the officers try to reassure her and tell her it's probably just a coincidence and some stupid kids. Everything seems fine now, but call us again if you need us. And they leave. Needless to say, Trish has a really hard time falling asleep. But when she finally does, she dreams about her mom. Her mom says, I know what you thought of him, but he saved you tonight. When she wakes up, she knows she should feel good about the visit from her mom, but she can't. Instead, she's angry because when she went to bed, she felt like Jeff was just messing with her again, playing with her head in his toxic, manipulative way. So this dream of her mother siding with Jeff again just sent her into that same spiral of insecurity that she'd had while her mother was still alive. But she vows to forget about the entire last 24 hours. Weeks go by, and she doesn't know whether Jeff has tried to text her anymore because she blocked his number, but she still can't shake the memory of that night. She can't let it go. So, against her better judgment, she finally decides to reach out to Jeff's sister. Trish and his sister were never very close because his sister was none too quiet about the fact that she thought their relationship was toxic and never wanted them to be together. But she was the most neutral person that Trish could think of to reach out to. She reaches out to her on social media, kind of explains everything that's been going on, and asks her, so do you have any idea why he's texting me? What does he want? And how did he know these kids were going to show up at my door? The response she receives is certainly not the response she expects. What she gets is a very angry word lashing, full of capital letters and exclamation points. Something to the effect of, stop messing with me, this isn't funny, this is going too far. And a few other choice tidbits I will leave to your imagination. Trish is a little shocked and really confused, so she kind of nervously replies to her and asks, what are you talking about? Jeff's sister tells Trish, Jeff's dead. He died a couple of years ago. So if somebody is texting you, it ain't him. Trish's world spins, and all she can think about is that dream she had of her mother saying Jeff had saved her. She goes into her phone and opens up her list of blocked phone numbers, and that phone number isn't there. So she either never blocked the number, so it wasn't in her blocked list, or it somehow disappeared from the blocked list, or it never existed. But she could swear that she blocked that number. Didn't she? The black-eyed children never returned, but she knows to her core that she saw those kids at her door. She knows she heard them say, did he tell you not to let us in? And now she really can't let it go. So she starts digging in and researching, and she learns about black-eyed kids and the fact that plenty of people have seen them, but nobody knows what they are or where they come from. As for Trish, she believes that all of these apologetic messages were from Jeff, making peace with her from the other side, and that her mom was right. He had saved her, but from what, no one knows. This story comes from Reddit user In the Labyrinth. We're going to call him Jim. Jim's dad had recently passed, and his mom wasn't really taking it that well after having been married for 63 loving years. She needed and appreciated Jim's support, and Jim was more than willing to go visit her and keep her company. But that night, it was getting late, so Jim said goodbye to his mom and headed out the door. His mom lives in the suburbs. Tiny lawns, plenty of neighbors, paved roads. And even though it's almost 11 p.m. when he leaves, The streets are still well lit by all the streetlights. These lights, however, only illuminate the road, and glancing across the street, the houses are cast in an eerie shadow. Even a safe, charming little neighborhood like his mom's can seem spooky and uninviting when cast in deep, late-night shadows. And Jim is spooked. Sliding into his car, he revs the engine, waves to his mom, who's standing in the doorway wrapped in a shawl. Jim starts driving the car down the road and out of the neighborhood, and decides to take the back way home since it's a shorter drive. In hindsight, he says this may not have been a good idea. Jim lives a decent distance away, way out in the country, in an old farmhouse that he grew up in. His dad had left it in his name when he and Jim's mom had moved to a smaller place. Growing up, Jim's father had always told him, "Don't go out at night and beware the devils." He was a strong believer in anything and everything paranormal, a very superstitious man, and Jim always had to resist the urge to laugh at his words. But he knew he meant well. Driving down these dark country roads, there are no streetlights, and the paved road is cracked and full of potholes. The fields on either side of the road are empty, just blank stretches of overgrown grass and untended shrubbery. One might even see a deer or two in those fields, but not tonight. The moon offers little light as the sky rolls with dark, threatening clouds, ready to unleash a storm at any moment. And sure enough, a few moments later, Jim can hear the low grumble of thunder. No rain just yet, much to Jim's relief. He hates driving at night, and he hates driving in the rain. And he knows putting those two things together usually doesn't end well. Surrounded by the rolling thunder, Jim starts to feel anxious. He can't quite explain it. He just feels shaken up. But he just chalks it up to the dark night, the impending rain, and reading way too many ghost stories and legends. Tonight is a perfect reflection of the mood of those stories, which he reads almost obsessively, slowing down a bit as he attempts to find a station that'll come in clearly. But nothing. Weird. There's a broadcasting tower right near the road that he's on, so it usually comes in perfectly, clear as day. But still, nothing. And the white noise and the static of the blank stations do nothing to appease Jim's anxiety. And he grips the steering wheel tightly as more thunder booms through the sky. More than a little annoyed, he shuts off the radio and glances down at his dashboard. He's almost out of gas. Ah, crap, Jim says, and he starts searching for a gas station. As he scans the side of the road, he notices from the corner of his eye 2 figures walking along the shadows on the edge of the road. They're walking slowly. One turned around, walking backwards, with his or her thumb sticking out. And Jim feels compelled to pull over and offer them a ride. And he finds his hands turning the wheel slightly. But he pulls back, realizing how stupid it would be for him to let 2 random strangers into his car in the middle of the night on a backcountry road. So Jim speeds up and passes them, trying not to look at them. Though as he does, he feels oddly intrigued by them. But he quickly gets his focus back on the road ahead. It starts drizzling now, dropping his mood another level or 2. And along with the rain, the thunder seems to be getting louder and closer as the storm moves in. Seconds after passing the hitchhikers, Jim gives in to his compulsion to look at the 2 figures as he steals a glance in his rearview mirror. It seems as if they're walking faster, but Jim figures that has to be his imagination, because how would he be able to tell if they're walking faster with it being so dark and rainy? Looking back at the road in front of him, he almost misses a sign that alerts him to an upcoming gas station. A sigh of relief passes over his lips as he slows down, keeping his eyes peeled for the station ahead. The 2 figures long gone from his mind. And soon after, he pulls into the gas station slowly as the rain starts to pick up. The store is closed, but luckily they have 24-hour pump service. Jim shuts off his car and gets out, glancing over his shoulder, still unable to shake that uneasy feeling that is still building inside of him. And as he stands under the light of the overhang, he's trying to figure out how to work the pump, his mind not being able to focus on the simple task. And the rain picks up, heavier and louder, as Jim, despite his shaking hands, is finally able to get the nozzle into his car. Jim has a horrible feeling that his shaking is not due to the cold, wet air. Suddenly, the overhead lights of the gas station start flickering, a couple of them going out altogether. It feels as if the temperatures dropped 20 degrees in the last few seconds. As Jim glances around, an even deeper sinking feeling emerging in his stomach. Turning around, back toward the road, he sees exactly what he expects to see. The color drains from his face, and he breathes in a quick, sharp breath. There, across the street, the two figures from the road stand there, facing him. They start crossing the street, slowly but surely, as Jim fumbles with the gas nozzle, willing it to pump faster. And Jim's whole body is shaking now as he looks back up. The hitchhikers are now at the entrance to the gas station, and Jim's breathing is quick and shallow as he blindly shoves the nozzle back into its holder, not able to tear his eyes away from the figures. And as they walk closer, he becomes more frantic, even though now that they're walking into the light, he can see that they're just teenagers. They look ragged, frigid, and soaked from the rain. And Jim straightens up a bit, still terrified, but another compulsive feeling, similar to the one he experienced in the car, is bubbling, and he feels obligated to talk to them. They are now standing at the next pump. As Jim slides in his car, fumbles for his keys, and drops them in the footwell. Leaning down, he swipes them up and sits back up, a cold shock hitting him as he suddenly comes face to face with one of the teens. The kid has one hand on his window, knocking forcefully with the other. Jim rolls down the window slightly, but before he can open his mouth to speak, the teen speaks first, while the other one stands in the background, a bit of a grin on her pale face.
Can you give us a ride into town? We missed the bus and don't have a ride.
He speaks slowly, and something about his voice makes Jim shiver. Jim opens his mouth, but no sound comes out. Clearing his throat, Jim glances at the dashboard, and then at the keys in his hand. I'm sorry, but I'm not going into town, he stutters, keeping his eyes down, avoiding the stare that he can feel coming through the window. And the teenager knocks louder, making Jim jump a little as he once again insists on a ride. And Jim says no to him once more and looks up, trying to seem intimidating, but a terrifying sight greets him. He looks the kid right in the eyes and gasps, his back pushing hard against the seat as he, in his panic, tries to move away. His eyes are blacker than night, endless black, no discernible pupils, and no whites showing at all. Pure black, deep, brooding, and surprisingly intriguing. But Jim's fear gets the better of him, and he quickly turns the key and the engine revs to life. And Jim thanks God it didn't stall. And the kid bangs on the window with a pale fist, screaming now for a ride. Jim puts the car in gear and goes screaming down the road. He had laughed at his father's superstitious warnings before, never taking them seriously. But now, as Jim heads down the road, he apologizes to his father again and again. After driving for a few more minutes, Jim pulls up into his driveway and up onto the lawn in front of his porch. At this point, he doesn't want to spend any more time outside than he already has. So he jumps from the car, leaving the car door open, runs inside, slams the door, and locks it. And he even goes so far as to put a chair in front of the door in case someone or something tries to get in. Sinking into the chair in front of the door, Jim shivers and cries uncontrollably, hiding his head in his hands as two dark figures stand there at the end of his driveway. Today's story comes from an anonymous thoughtcatalog.com reader, so we're just going to call him Bryce. It is 1 o'clock in the morning, and Bryce is a little late on walking his dog, Dakota. She's a 3-year-old German Shepherd, and she is super gentle for being such a big dog. And in fact, not once in the entire time that he's had her has he even seen her go running up to anybody. She's usually pretty nervous around strangers. Bryce and Dakota live very close to a large park that leads to a hiking trail. And there's a large area that's used as a baseball field and is kind of like a big gateway into the wilderness surrounded by trees and darkness. And they walk a ways into the park where Bryce lets Dakota off the leash and follows behind her as she sniffs around, trying to find the perfect spot to do her business, just like they do every night. This night, however, is different. As soon as Bryce takes off her leash, Dakota takes off at top speed toward the trail opening. And Bryce thinks, dang it. He knows he shouldn't leave her off the leash, but that's just their little secret that they've always kept just between the two of them. But he never thinks twice about doing it because up until now, she's never run away. And all Bryce can think is, if she goes in there and doesn't come back, I don't think I can go in after her. He is not about to get lost in pitch black darkness on a freezing cold night to get eaten by some mountain lions. Bryce decides he'll just wait for her and maybe call his roommate to let him know that they may be gone a little longer than usual. But Dakota doesn't go in. She runs until she's about 8 feet from the trail entrance and stops. Now, wondering what on earth has gotten into his usually passive dog, Bryce sees a tall, dark figure calmly walk out of the darkness. Now, most people would probably freak out right there. Some weirdo walking out of the woods in the dead of night? Nope. But Bryce, he's in pretty good shape, 6'5", and if nothing else, people are usually more afraid of him than he is of them. Plus, it's not like random weirdos are rare in LA, even in his middle-class, good suburban neighborhood. So Bryce calls for Dakota, but she doesn't move. He has never seen a dog literally follow someone with their gaze, never breaking contact. Just doesn't make sense. That is when the first wave of uneasiness kicks in. Nothing major, just really strange. Bryce starts jogging towards Dakota when he notices the figure is a girl. About 17, 20 years old, about 5'9", and from what he can see, she is stunning. She has long legs, a beautiful body, dark hair almost down to her shoulders in a tousled, sexy kind of way. Her long, messy bangs frame her face as she stops walking to look at Dakota for a second. Bryce can't make out her face really, but what he doesn't see is a deathly pale girl in a white dress floating around like the stereotypical dead girl. Instead, he sees a stunning girl in skin-tight dark jeans, boots, a dark leather jacket, and from what he can tell, she has a light complexion, but by no means does she look like a ghost. His first thought is maybe if they talk, he can get her number. But then he remembers that this girl just walked out of the hiking trail in the middle of the night. This documentary about female serial killers he saw once pops into Bryce's head. But even if she is a crazy person, he still has no idea how she could just walk around up there in the woods when darkness is so thick that you probably can't see a foot in front of you. Even though there's something really off about all of this, when the girl stops to look at Dakota again, Bryce lightly says to her, "Don't worry, she's harmless." The girl completely ignores him and continues walking. Bryce thinks, okay, I guess I shouldn't expect someone who's walking around in the woods in the middle of the night to keep a conversation going. He puts Dakota's leash on, but she doesn't budge. All she does is take a couple of steps toward the girl, then stops whenever the girl looks back at her. "I think she likes you," Bryce says, to which, again, the girl just looks at Dakota. All of this feels really weird, almost like a dream with a light feeling and that silence that sounds almost like being underwater. No matter how much Bryce tries to act cool, this is not normal. Here he is trying to get his dog to budge, who seems to be both frightened and hypnotized by the unbroken eye contact from this intimidating, mysterious girl. He's stuck somewhere between "I'm so embarrassed" and "she's gonna pepper spray me," when the girl takes one step toward Dakota, and the dog tucks her tail between her legs and whimpers like she has seen the devil himself. And if anyone knows when something's up, it's a dog. That's when Bryce thinks, time to go. As soon as the girl starts walking again, Bryce picks up his 60-pound dog around the stomach and starts speed walking back toward home. He knows he probably looks like a total idiot, but he doesn't care. Whatever dream-like trance he was in before has been broken by Dakota's reaction, and everything inside him is telling him, go home. He is halfway across the field before he sets her down, and she still won't move. Bryce thinks, are you kidding me? When his stomach jumps into his throat as he turns around to see the girl standing on some bleachers not even 10 feet away. But now she's actually standing in the light so Bryce can see her face, and she is a knockout. But her eyes are blacker than black. The black fills her entire eyeball. It's just two shiny orbs inside of two almond-shaped sockets. He wants to run, but something makes him stay. Bryce is so scared that he can hear a faint, high-pitched humming in his ears, and his entire body feels heavy. He would have dismissed her as some strange chick in Halloween contacts, but he can't explain the feeling of absolute, paralyzing horror that he is experiencing for no real reason. The fear has hit him like a freight train, and he hopes to God he never again feels as helpless and mortified as he does right now. She is not human. She is not a regular girl. And to make things worse, the girl says in a sultry, sweet tone that Bryce had expected to sound more like something from The Walking Dead, "Does she bite?" Still in defense mode, Bryce manages to spit out some sounds that vaguely resemble the word no. He doesn't know why, but he feels like as soon as he blinks again, she's gonna be standing right in front of him like the weeping angels from Doctor Who. And that's exactly what happens. She waits a couple of seconds and says, "Do you live nearby?" To which Bryce is gonna lie and say no. But as soon as he starts to speak, she says, "Did you drive here?" Bryce starts backing up, trying to distance himself slowly. And again, before he can speak, she says, "I'm gonna need to come with you." "You'll let me come with you. That's okay, right?" "It's okay. Don't be afraid." And with that, Dakota bolts, and Bryce starts running like a terrified child with his dog leading the way. Bryce doesn't stop until he catches up with Dakota on the other side of the street, when he finally takes a moment to turn around and make sure she isn't following him. The girl is already on the other side of the park, calmly walking back towards the woods where she came from. Bryce and Dakota start walking back home while Bryce calls his roommate asking him to come and pick them up with the car. And he never walks Dakota after dark again. Chris from Arkansas wrote into Darkness Radio, my Minnesota homies, with a bizarre black-eyed kid encounter he had in 2015. Around the end of April, beginning of May, Chris was in Oregon for work. He worked for a company that handled the customer service member privilege point of sale system for Planet Fitness, and he was there checking on a few locations. And since Planet Fitness is a 24/7 business, he had to cater to all the shifts and would show up at the club locations several times, both night and day. One night, at approximately 11:30 at night, he was headed to the Planet Fitness in Beaverton, Oregon. His rental car had Bluetooth capabilities, and he was playing an episode of Coast to Coast AM on the car's speakers. The episode was a George Newry episode, and George had a guest on to talk about the gin. And Chris remembers because George brought up the idea of black-eyed kids to the guest, who said she thought that was gin related. Looking back, that was a serious coincidence, because what happened when he arrived at the club chilled him to the core. When Chris arrives at the club, he decides to have a smoke in the parking lot with the driver's side window of his car open so he can continue to listen to Coast AM without actually smoking in the car so he doesn't get a fine. And the Planet Fitness there is in an L-shaped strip mall. And he doesn't remember all the stores in the strip mall, but Planet Fitness is furthest to the right, and all the way to the left is a pharmacy of some kind. And Chris's passenger side is parallel with Planet Fitness, which is about 30 feet away from a streetlight. And the pharmacy is about 75 yards away and is obviously closed. And Chris is just leaning on his car, smoking and playing on his phone. He looks up and glances at the pharmacy and can see from the light of the marquee sign 2 people standing in front of it. And he thinks, well, that's weird. Why would these people be standing outside an obviously closed pharmacy at almost midnight? But the thought is fleeting, and Chris is once again head down, Facebooking on his phone. After a few seconds, he looks up again, and he notices that the 2 people that he can now tell are kids or teenagers are about 20% closer, and it strikes him as odd. He didn't see them walk to that location, and they are just looking at him. And Chris says he knows that they were only looking in his general direction. But he adds, only half sarcastically, that it feels like they are looking into his soul. From this distance, he can tell that both are wearing hooded sweatshirts. They're dark in color, and both kids have their hoods up. And they are just outside that street light glow. Light, but not enough to see any real details. And maybe this should have raised some flags, but once again, Chris's head goes back to his phone. And around this time, George is talking to his guest about evil spirit attachment in items from the Middle East that servicemen had brought back home with them. And Chris glances back up, and the kids are now 25 or 30 feet away from him. They are once again outside of the direct streetlight glow, but this time he can see them much clearer. This time, their heads are aimed down. He can't see their faces, but he can make out their clothes. One has an olive drab green hooded sweatshirts with no markings and no insignias. The hoodie is up over the top of what appears to be a gray baseball hat with, again, no markings or insignias. Baggy, nondescript jeans and black low-top shoes, also with no markings of any kind. The other is dressed very similarly, the only difference being a navy blue zip-up hoodie with the hoodie up over the top of what looks to be a black baseball cap, khaki pants, and white shoes. Same as the first, nothing to distinguish any brands on any of the articles of clothing. And the kids are standing still. Chris didn't see them move to their current location, and it's like they're frozen. not moving at all. And he doesn't know how or why, but he just goes back to his phone, not bothered at all. But Chris gets a weird feeling this time almost instantly and looks up. And there they are, 5 feet in front of him and not moving, just closer. And again, just outside of the light from the streetlight. But this time, he has the best view yet of what they look like. Their clothes were weird. They were too big. Not too big like kids in the 90s wore, but too big like hand-me-downs. And they're faded. Chris can see the colors of everything that they're wearing, but it's like they're dingy. And he can tell by their physical build that they're both males, and judging by their size, he's guessing they were about 15 years old. Still not bothered, Chris tosses the cigarette butt underneath the car and looks at the kids and says, "Hey guys, what's going on? Anything I can do for you?"
"Please, kind sir, may we borrow a cigarette? It's very lonely at night. We only need one cigarette. Thank you. Please."
After they finish speaking, they slowly raise their heads to show Chris their faces. And Chris remembers thinking, it's kind of late for teenagers to be out on a Thursday. And almost as if they plucked that thought straight out of his head, he hears,
"It's quite all right. We have permission."
As soon as permission rolls off the lips of the second kid, their faces are now even with Chris's, showing him solid jet black eyes. Chris freezes. His mind starts going about 1,000,000 miles a minute because, damn it, he knows what black-eyed kids are. Well, not what they are, but he knows of them. He can't move or speak, but he sees that their faces are pretty much the definition of the word blank, but only almost, because the edges around their slit straight mouths start to curl up ever so slightly. And the inside of Chris's stomach begins to get colder, and with all his might, he tries to turn his face, but he can't. The second kid takes a step forward, and the movement catches Chris's eye, and he looks down. And the moment that eye contact is broken, everything Chris knows about black-eyed kids encounters comes rushing into his head. Chris turns around and runs into the club, sprinting in loafers, all of his 6'1", 250 pounds, screaming the entire way. The young kids at the counter just stare at him as he comes barreling through the door. And he tries his best to explain to the blank faces at the staff behind the counter. But in Chris's estimation, they aren't cool enough to have heard about black-eyed kids. He turns around and looks back out the plate glass window of the club and sees the 2 teenagers standing side by side, looking in the club window. And when Chris sees them, chills run down his spine. This story comes from Reddit user SarahBeth11. And Sarah Beth says that she is by no means a writer, just a domestic engineer living in North Texas. And she also states that she does not believe in the paranormal. Not ghosts, not demons, not aliens, none of it. However, the event that happened to her on Halloween of 2013 has left her scratching her head ever since. This was her first and last post on Reddit. And she says she had never heard of the black-eyed kids until the day before she shared her story when she told her best friend about the incident. And her friend, an avid reader of No Sleep Stories, told Sarah Beth, "If you don't post this, I will." Now, according to Sarah Beth, that night had been a pretty slow trick-or-treat night for her neighborhood, which is pretty odd. They usually have kids from different areas being dropped off in their neighborhood, creating a constant parade of kids at the door. But oddly, that night they had no more than 8 or 10 groups of kids all night. And around 9:30, she and her husband are in the family room watching one of those ghost shows that are based on actual events. And while she and her husband both discount the paranormal stuff, they do love a good ghost story. And it's Halloween, right? Sarah Beth and her husband hadn't had any activity at their door in over a half an hour. So they decided it's time to get up and turn off the porch light and let their dog Chloe out of her crate. Chloe is an American bulldog, and she's very docile. They only put her in her crate because they were afraid that Chloe would try to get out and play with all of the kids. And Sarah Beth didn't feel like chasing her down the street. And they didn't want her to scare any of the kids because she can look a little intimidating for the younger kids. So Sarah Beth gets up, turns the outside light off, lets Chloe out of her crate, who follows Sarah Beth back to the couch and lays at her feet. And it was getting close to 10 p.m. when her husband says, "You know what? I got to work tomorrow. I'm tired. I'm going to go upstairs, take a shower, and go to bed." And her teenage son was out with his friends at a local haunted house, and she didn't expect him to be back for at least another hour. So that left Sarah Beth alone on the couch with Chloe. Now, just because she says she doesn't believe doesn't mean those ghost shows don't freak her out a bit. And now, watching them alone, she admits she was a little on edge. It wasn't long after she heard the water upstairs turn on for the shower when she hears a light knock, knock, knock at the front door. And Sarah Beth's initial reaction is, "What the hell? It's 10 o'clock. Go home." But an uneasy feeling comes over her. Why the knock? Their doorbell glows, and in the dark, without the porch light, it would be extra bright. It would be extra obvious to anybody standing there. And Sarah Beth pauses. She can't really ignore it. Their front door has a big beveled glass panel, and anyone standing right at the door can see in enough to see that somebody is in the family room watching TV. It would be pretty rude for her to just sit there and not answer it. Knock, knock, knock. Again from the door. She glances down at Chloe, and Chloe is gone. And Sarah looks along the usual path that Chloe takes to the front door, expecting her to be on her way there. But nothing. Chloe's not there. Sarah Beth stands up to look around the room better and finds Chloe crouching by the back door like she wants to go out. However, Chloe never asks to go out that way. She always comes and licks Sarah Beth's hand or puts her head on her knee. That was totally out of character for Chloe. And Sarah Beth admits that Chloe's odd behavior only heightens her anxiety. "Chloe, crate," she says. Chloe just turns back to look at Sarah Beth like, "Hell no, lady. I ain't moving." And Sarah Beth yells up to her husband, but she knows if he's already stepped into the shower, there is no way he's gonna hear her. Knock, knock, knock. Again. About that same time, a car drives down the street and casts just enough light onto the door that Sarah Beth can see the silhouette of 2 young children on the other side of the glass. She instantly feels relief. It's just some kids. Probably a couple of neighbors who are on their way back home for trick-or-treating and just want to stop and show Sarah Beth their costumes. And she heads to the door and looks back to make sure that Chloe isn't following her. What a great watchdog, she thinks to herself as Chloe just sits there, not moving any closer to the door. And Sarah Beth turns on the porch light when she gets to the door, and sure enough, she can see through the glass that it's 2 pretty young kids. And she thinks, it's a little late for such young kids, and wonders about what kind of parents would let their kids roam the streets this late at night. And she opens the door, but only wide enough to where she can block Chloe's escape should she decide to get brave. So only a couple of feet. And what strikes Sarah Beth immediately as odd is that the kids aren't wearing any costumes, just their normal street clothes. Also, no customary trick-or-treat either. And Sarah Beth starts to feel very uneasy again. Standing at the door are a boy and a girl. The girl to Sarah's left is older, about 11 or 12, and she can tell the girl is blonde, but she can't make out any distinct features because of the way that the porch lights are hung. Most of the light falls behind them, and Sarah Beth had not opened the door wide enough for any of the inside light to fall directly on them either. But she can tell that the boy is younger, probably a foot shorter, maybe 8 or 9 years old, and looks to have light brown hair. The girl very politely speaks up. "Ma'am, can we come inside to use your phone to call our mom?" As the girl speaks, something in the pit of Sarah Beth's stomach is telling her something is wrong. What kid, even at that age, doesn't have a cell phone of their own these days? She can't remember the last time anybody asked to use her home phone. Hun? Don't you have a phone of your own that you can call your mom on? And both kids turn and look at one another like they're about to say something, but they never do. They just both turn back to Sarah Beth, and she says, "Ma'am, my cell phone battery doesn't have any charge left in it. Can we please come inside and call our mother? We're alone out here, and my brother is scared." And Sarah Beth admits that there are now two competing feelings going on inside of her. The first, a mother's heart that desperately wants to help these two young children get back to their mom. The other, a sinking fear in her stomach that keeps the other feeling at bay. It was then that Sarah Beth noticed that during their conversation, she had actually opened up the door a few more inches that she had no recollection of doing. She stops. "Honey, why don't you give me your mother's number and I'll call her myself?" Another pause, and the kids once again look at each other without saying anything. And after a moment, they both turn back to Sarah Beth, and the girl says, "Ma'am, my little brother needs to use your bathroom. Can we come inside while you call our mom?" And with that last statement, the little girl moves closer toward the door, like she's just going to walk right on past Sarah Beth. And as the girl makes that forward move, she steps into the light coming from inside of the house, giving Sarah Beth her first real good look at the girl. Solid, jet black eyes. That's all she can see. That motherly instinct is gone and replaced by terror that Sarah Beth doesn't think she has ever felt in her entire life. She could feel every hair on her arms and the back of her neck standing at attention. And Sarah Beth closes the door again to where just her face is able to peek out. And the little girl stops and pleads again. "Please, ma'am, we're really scared and alone out here. We have to come inside. Please help us." Then, like on cue, both kids begin to whimper and cry. That's when the fear takes over and Sarah Beth shuts and locks the door. "I'll call your mom if you give me the number," she shouts through the door, "but I am not letting you in my house." And she can still see them there on the porch, staring at her through the beveled glass window. And part of her wants to run upstairs to her husband, but the bigger part doesn't want to lose track of where they are. That would freak her out even more to not know where they are. And after what seems like forever, but was probably only a few seconds, Sarah Beth decides to call her neighbor who lives across the street. And as she makes her way to the side table in the family room where her phone is, she glances to the back door. Chloe is nowhere to be found. They later find her in the guest bedroom under the bed. And when Sarah gets her phone and starts looking through for the contact information for her neighbor, the kids step away from the window and begin to walk towards the street. And with her phone in hand, her finger poised to hit the button to call the neighbor, Sarah Beth walks closer to the window to see if she can see where the kids went. Once she's close enough to the glass, she can see out enough to make out people's shapes, but she can't see much detail. Of course, standing that close to the door makes it pretty obvious for anybody outside to see that someone is standing right at the door. But right now, Sarah Beth doesn't really care if these kids know she's watching them. From the door, Sarah Beth can see that the kids are standing at the street lamp nearest to her house, staring at her. And only after she hits the button to actually dial her neighbor's number and puts the phone to her ear, do the kids start walking away down the street. And once Sarah Beth sees her neighbor come out and go stand underneath that street lamp, she goes out to meet him, and the kids are nowhere to be found. As she says, she doesn't believe in any of this stuff and had never heard of black-eyed kids before talking to her friend. What she really thinks, what she has to think, is that these kids were just out yanking people's chains on Halloween night. But she will say this for them: they were good. Really good. They scared the crap out of her and her dog. The encounter that kicked off the modern era of black-eyed kid sightings and has had the internet buzzing for decades happened in 1996 in Abilene, Texas. Brian Bethel, a reporter for the Abilene Reporter News, is sitting in his car outside the mall about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, using the light from the nearby theater marquee to write a check to his cable company that he plans to pop in the overnight drop box. Lost in his task, Brian is startled by a knock on his driver's side window. He looks up to see two boys somewhere between the ages of 10 and 14. And he notices that one of them has dark hair with olive skin, while the other one has more pale red hair with lighter skin. But beyond that, the rest of them seems pretty typical. Typical young boy build, young boy clothes, young boy haircuts, or lack thereof. He notices nothing unusual and assumes that the boys are going to ask him for money or something. But as soon as he starts moving his arm to roll down the window, he notices a slight change of perception that sets off warning sirens in his head. But too late. So Brian rolls down his window just a little bit. Still not sure why his fight or flight has kicked in, but glad his car is still running, just in case. "What do you want?" he asks, and the dark-haired boy responds,
We want to see the movie, but we left our money at home. Can you help us out and give us a ride home so we can get it?
Brian feels the irrational fear growing, and he looks at the theater marquee and then down at the clock on his dashboard. The last showing of Mortal Kombat started almost an hour ago. If he gives these kids a ride anywhere, the movie will pretty much be over by the time they get back. And Brian is hesitant, the odd smile on the speaker's face making him nervous. His lack of response draws a round of assurances from the boys.
It won't take long. We're just little kids. It's not like we have a gun or anything.
Brian notices that his hand is drifting toward the door handle. He jerks it away and looks at the boys out the window. And in that brief moment that he breaks eye contact with the dark-haired boy, something changes, and his mind explodes in a hurricane of all-consuming terror. Brian looks back at the boys and is horrified to see them staring back at him with solid, jet black eyes. Giant, soul-consuming black holes reflecting the light from the theater marquee. He has now moved to level 10 panic mode, but tries to appear calm. He ekes out a very weak, "Sorry guys, I gotta go," puts his car in reverse and starts rolling up his window. The boys can see Brian's fear, and the boy in the back has a look of confusion. But the spokesperson starts banging on the window sharply as it's rolling up, and with venom-tinged words says,
We can't come in until you tell us it's okay. Just let us in and we'll be gone before you know it.
But the sight of those infinitely black eyes is enough to get Brian into action. He backs out of the parking spot and rushes out of the lot in a blind panic. Once back on the road, he steals a quick look in his rear view mirror before he stomps on the gas. The boys are gone. And now, after years of reflection, Brian still doesn't know what happened to him that night. But he says there is one thing that he does know. A gut feeling that rises to the level of almost certainty. If he had given them a ride, he wouldn't be here to tell the story today. The writer of this tale didn't give her name, so we'll call her Erin. Erin has read many accounts of these black-eyed kids, but doesn't think any of them come close to what happened to her when she let 2 of them in her house. Many people believe that if you let them in, they will kill you. But Erin is here to tell us that's not necessarily true. This is her story. She's sitting in her bedroom at home one evening when she hears a knock at the door. And it's not really that late, so she doesn't think twice about opening the door to whomever it is. When she opens it, there are 2 young boys standing there, looking at the floor. Yes, Erin says, and the taller one asks,
Can we come in? We're lost, and my brother needs to use the bathroom.
Now, Erin lives in an area where it's super easy to get lost, so she assumes they're telling the truth and are just looking down because they're shy. So Erin lets them in, and the one who needs to use the bathroom heads right up the stairs, like he knows exactly where he's going. So she shouts up after him, It's on the right! Now, maybe she should find this strange, but since most bathrooms are upstairs, and the boy's pretty young, she doesn't really think anything of it. She points down the hall and says to the other one, Phone's over there.
Thanks,
He says, and starts to walk in that direction, and is suddenly overcome with dread, an awful feeling. A premonition that something bad is about to happen. She gets very nervous and a bit shaky, and she's not really sure why. And the boy stops at the phone and pauses. Everything okay? She asks. The boy turns to Erin and looks up, allowing Erin to see his eyes. A picture that she will never get out of her head. She is so scared, she can't even scream, and she turns to run down the hall, but the other kid is right there, standing at the end. Erin becomes very dizzy, struggling just to remain standing as he walks closer to her, telling her,
We've been sent to collect you.
Erin can't even look at his face, so she pushes her way past him and makes a mad dash for her front room, slamming the door behind her. She is in total shock. She can't even think straight. This is straight out of a horror movie. After standing against the door, holding it shut for what seems like an hour or so, Erin finally musters up the courage to make a dash for the back door. She bolts to the door, unlocks it, and runs as fast as she can through the backside of her garden and leaps over her fence, not looking back. Erin's friend lives close by, so she runs to his house and tells him the whole story. But as she guessed, he's a little skeptical. Please come back with me, she pleads. But when they arrive and look through the house, they find no sign of the 2 boys or any evidence that anything happened. Erin says ever since this happened to her, she has dreams that these kids are standing over her bed, their hands stretching out to her. She just hopes to God she never sees those black-eyed children again. Another man, we'll call him John, also has an encounter with something that he can only describe as a black-eyed child while he was traveling on the back roads of Texas. And John's been in the military for over 7 years, enlisting right out of high school. He considers himself a level-headed, rational person, meaning no interest in the paranormal and all that. That is, until this encounter, which occurs during a nighttime drive on a lonely Texas back road in the summer of 2009. Now, John's family goes back several generations in the Lone Star State. And because of their long history there, John has relatives all over Texas from east to west. Each time he gets leave from the military, he heads home to visit family. In 2009, John goes home on leave to visit his parents in the Houston area. After a couple of days with them, he decides to take a drive to West Texas to visit some cousins. John loves driving the back roads of Texas, especially late at night. There are very few cars to contend with, and he says it gives him a sense of peace to drive under the starry sky. John has never been a heavy sleeper, and he can really stay up for long periods of time without needing any sleep. But this is a long trip even for him. So he plans to make the trip in 2 legs, spending a day with a friend from high school halfway to his destination. He drives his first day, gets to his buddies, and leaves his buddy's house that evening after dinner so he can make it to his cousin's house by early morning the next day. Full tank of gas, full thermos of coffee, John sets out for the long drive. And it was a perfect night, he said. There isn't a cloud in the sky, so the stars are super bright. But he's still taking his time. He's driving through deer country, and they tend to cross the road late at night, and he doesn't want to hit one. Around 3 a.m, John hits a long stretch of road where the houses and the lights are few and far between. And although he's wide awake, he still just likes to drink coffee while he's driving. And at this point, he had finished off half of the thermos that he had already refilled at a 24-hour mark. So it is time to answer the call of nature. He hits a length of road that is long and straight, and not a single car in sight in either direction. He slows down his truck and parks just off the side of the highway. He walks a few steps away from the road and takes care of his business. And when he's done, he just stands there for a few minutes and stretches, kind of working out some of the kinks, and takes a minute to take in the beautiful starry night. Takes all of maybe 5 minutes max. Deciding it's time to get back on the road, John passes in front of his truck and reaches for the door handle and jerks back with a start. Standing just beyond the driver's door is a young boy. The boy doesn't move a muscle. If John's eyes hadn't been adjusted to the dark, he probably wouldn't have even seen him. But he sees right away that it's just a kid, so he calms down a little bit. He shakes his head and says, "Geez, kid, you scared the hell out of me." Not missing a beat, the kid says to John,
"I want to get in your truck."
John doesn't say anything at first. He isn't sure what to say. But he feels a cold chill. He pauses and takes a breath, looking at the boy. His mind is racing, trying to figure out, where did this kid come from? John turns and glances around in each direction, looking for any sign of a house. Even out here, most people leave a nightlight on after dark. Nothing. He scans the road too. He sees 0 cars in either direction. The boy still hasn't moved, and again repeats his cold statement.
"I want to get in your truck now."
The hair on the back of John's neck stands up. He's got a bad feeling in the pit of his stomach. He tries to reason with his brain, thinking things like, he's just a kid, there's nothing to be afraid of, but nothing's working. He can't kick that feeling that just keeps getting stronger. John tries to smile and decides to try to talk to the boy and find out exactly why he is alone in the middle of nowhere. "You live around here, kid?" The boy stands completely still and responds in the same monotone voice,
"Just let me get in your truck. We can go for a ride."
John asks, "Do you need to get home, kid? Whereabouts do you live?" And the boy remains planted in his spot between the road and John's truck.
"We can get in your truck now. It won't take too long."
John leans forward a little to try to see as many details as he can in this low light. Now, based on the kid's height and size, he guesses that the kid was about 10 years old, wearing a dull white shirt that looks a little bit too big for him, tucked into dark pants. His hair is dark and shaggy, but it's not long. He can't really see the boy's eyes, but his skin is super light and pale. But that is about the best that John can do in the low light. The nervous feeling is growing more and more intense inside of John. The boy still hasn't moved from his spot, but again repeats his request, more insistent this time.
Just open the door and tell me to get in. We'll have a short ride.
John just wants to run and leave his truck and that boy as far behind as he can. He's squinting his eyes with this feeling like he's trying to shake off a punch or something. He shakes his head and tries to clear his thoughts. And right then, John knows it is time to go. He looks at his truck, then back at the kid. "I don't think so, kid," he answers. He takes a step forward, just enough to get the driver's door open, and keeps looking at the boy as he quickly jumps into the driver's seat. Puts the key in the ignition, starts it up, and looks out through his driver's side window. The boy is now standing right beside the driver's door, staring in at him. Never before and never since has John felt like he did when that kid was glaring at him through the window. He throws the truck in gear and floors it. A couple miles down the road, he slows down and pulls off the road again. He looks down at his hands and sees that he's holding the steering wheel so tight that his hands are totally white. Takes a deep breath, tries to calm down. All of a sudden, he feels ridiculous and starts to question himself. Why am I running from a kid? Maybe he really needed some help, but something about that kid had caused a very primal response in John, and his fight or flight response had totally taken over. But for the life of him, he can't figure out why. John composes himself for another moment, then turns the truck around. He is determined to go back, find the kid, and get some answers. If the boy is hurt or in trouble, John can at least get him home. He puts his high beams on and drives slowly back to the spot where he had encountered the boy. Now, John has a pretty good sense of distance and of his surroundings, and it only takes him one pass to find the exact spot where he'd pulled off the first time. He's driving slow and is shining a high-powered flashlight out the window. He passes that light all over looking for the kid. He drives past the spot, down about a half mile, and then comes back. And the boy is nowhere to be found, but he thinks he has to be close by. A kid that small can't move that fast. After a couple passes up and down the road, John pulls back over at the exact spot where he had parked the first time. He gets out of the truck and uses his flashlight to scan the area in all directions. Standing on that deserted road, his mind flashes back to the image of that kid staring in the window at him, and it gives him chills all over again. He gets back in the truck and drives away, but he makes it a point to look at the next mile marker. He wants to know and remember where that spot is. John had originally planned to stop for an early morning breakfast, but instead continues driving until he reaches his destination. It's really early in the morning, and thankfully his relatives had left the side door unlocked for him. Knowing he's not going to be able to sleep after what happened that night, he just sits down in the living room and turns on the TV. He just wants to distract himself with something from the normal world, something stupid, something simple. He just wants that kid out of his head. And by late morning, John is pretty successful at pushing it all to the back of his mind. He is enjoying his family, talking and joking around, and then that kid pops into his head. He sees him standing there, staring in the window of his truck. He just can't shake it, and he can't understand it. When John finally heads back to Houston, he drives during the day. He wants to make sure he hits that spot in bright sunshine. He finds it and stops, trying to see if there are any houses close by that the kid could have come from. But the nearest houses are, wow, off the beaten path and at least a few miles from the point of where he had this chat with this boy. John doesn't stay there very long. He has no intention of being anywhere near that area when the sun goes down. Nor does he even want to drive in the dark anymore. In fact, he completely stops driving at night after this encounter, suddenly preferring the bright light of day for his travels. He still feels haunted by the creepy image of the boy peering in through the window of his truck. He's never really been able to get that image out of his head. He can forget about it for a while, but it always seems to come back. And he's still looking for an explanation. How did that little kid, without really doing anything, manage to make John feel so scared? It made no sense. John believed his military training had prepared him for anything. Yet he found himself completely unprepared for a simple encounter with a strange child on a quiet back road in West Texas. The couple in this report live in a rural and secluded area of Vermont. Their names are not given in their account, so we will call them Rose and Paul. It's a snowy winter night, and the view outside of Rose and Paul's windows looks like a Norman Rockwell painting. It's the middle of the night, and Rose is awakened by a knocking at her front door. And knowing that the snow is making any kind of travel dangerous, her first thought is that there must have been an accident and somebody's coming to them for help. So she gets up, slips on her robe, goes over to her bedroom window, looks out, and can see that there are tracks coming up from the road into their driveway, but there's no car anywhere. The snow is still covering the road. Nobody's driven on it for at least a couple hours, and she can't quite see the front door from her bedroom window, but the motion sensor light is on, and she can see that somebody is standing there. So she rushes to the bed, shakes Paul, and as she's telling him what's going on, the knocking at the front door starts again, and Paul throws back the covers, grabs his robe, slips it on as he and Rose make their way downstairs to the front door. When Paul opens the door, there are two children standing in the snow, looking toward the ground, a boy and a girl who can't be more than 8 years old. They're dressed strangely and have odd haircuts. The girl's hair is long and straight, and the boy's haircut is dated and almost looks like a bowl cut. They are not dressed for winter. And Rose's first thought is that they must be Mennonite children. But as far as she knows, there isn't a large Mennonite community anywhere near them. The children are very unnerving to Rose and Paul. They would not make eye contact. And Paul asks them, "Is everything okay?" And they reply,
"Can we come in?"
Paul looks to Rose with a "what do I do now?" look. And Rose asks the children, "Where are your parents?"
"They'll be here soon,"
is all they said. Against their better judgment, Rose and Paul's parental instincts take over. They bring the children in out of the snowstorm and do what they can to warm them up with hot chocolate and make them comfortable until their parents arrive. And for a couple of kids that you might expect would be scared, cold, and freaked out from being lost in a snowstorm, they seem to be pretty comfortable sitting in a stranger's living room. And with their eyes still cast to the floor, they just keep repeating in a sing-songy tone,
"Our parents will be here soon. Our parents will be here soon. Our parents will be here soon."
Rose starts to notice that of their 4 cats, 3 of them are hiding, except Pigeon, who's with her in the kitchen as she's making more hot chocolate. Normally, the cats are very curious and friendly, and Rose and Paul have to make sure that they don't slip outside when somebody leaves. But this time, none of them even try to figure out who's there. All of the hair on Pigeon's neck is standing up, and his tail is puffed out as he's staring in the living room. And when Rose bends down to pet him and see what's wrong, he hisses growls and backs up until he is hidden underneath the kitchen island. She has never seen him do that before. Rose makes her way back to the living room and says, "More hot chocolate," doing her best to lighten the oppressive air in the room. Her announcement causes both children to look up, revealing their solid black eyes. Rose is horrified, and it takes everything she's got not to drop the mugs and run away. The kids see Rose's reaction and both stand up and say,
"We need to use your bathroom."
Rose's stare follows them as they both get up and go down the hall together to the bathroom. As soon as the children are out of sight, Rose turns to look at Paul, whose pale face and slack jaw tell Rose that he is just as shocked as she is. And they start to discuss what to do next when Paul's nose starts bleeding, something that has never happened to him before. Rose runs to the kitchen to get Paul some tissues when the power goes out. Now, it's not unusual for the power to go out during a Vermont blizzard, but Rose cannot shake the feeling that it has something to do with those two terrifying kids. And as she's hurrying back to Paul, Rose is stopped dead in her tracks by the two kids who are done in the bathroom and are just standing together at the end of the hall, apparently unfazed by the sudden darkness. Rose is petrified with fear as the children just stand there, motionless. And after what feels like an eternity, the boy says,
"Our parents are here."
And they walk to the door, open it up, and walk out, leaving the door wide open. Rose and Paul rush to the door to close it behind him and are taken aback by what they see in their driveway. The parents that the children had referred to are actually two men in black suits driving a black car. The men were very tall, at least 6 feet. And when Paul waved at them, they just stared back, got in the car with the children, and drove off. Rose and Paul are more than relieved to have the black-eyed children out of their house. But the worst is yet to come. In the months that follow, Rose and Paul lose all 4 of their cats. 3 of them just disappearing and are presumably dead, and 1 of them having a hemorrhage and dying right there in the house. And both Rose and Paul continue to have nosebleeds. And not long after the encounter, Paul is diagnosed with an aggressive form of skin cancer. Rose does not go into detail, but says that she is in the worst state of health she's ever been in her entire life. She is convinced that both her and her husband's ill health has everything to do with that snowy night that they allowed those black-eyed children into their home. For the last few years, Jason has gone all out for Halloween. Decorations, lights, fog, you name it. But this year, he's hardly put out anything. And it isn't because he's a single guy. It's not because he's going to be out of town. And it isn't because he doesn't like kids. He plays with his nieces and nephews in his yard all the time. It's not for any of those reasons. You see, something happened to Jason last year that scared the hell out of him and sucked all the fun out of Halloween. Last year, Jason had his brother's family over so they could trick-or-treat in his neighborhood, since they lived in an apartment complex and nothing much happens there for Halloween. And as usual, he has a bunch of neighborhood kids come to his door as well. Jason's family takes off to go home about 10:30. And by this time, there's only a few older trick-or-treaters, and even they are getting pretty few and far between. So by 11:30, everything's pretty much dried up as far as trick-or-treating goes, and so Jason calls it done and starts to relax and watch some TV. After about a half an hour or so, the doorbell rings. He grabs the candy bowl and heads over to the door, thinking it's actually kind of rude for trick-or-treaters to still be ringing doorbells at midnight. But then he notices that his decoration lights and everything are still on, so his house is still a beacon to the would-be trick-or-treaters. So he gets to the door and swings it open, and he's about to yell boo or some other kind of jump scare, something to freak out whoever's there. But he stops dead when he sees the kids at the door. One of them is probably about 13 or 14 years old, and the other's probably about 16 or 17, both of them boys. They aren't dressed up in costumes at all. Without knowing exactly why, Jason is immediately overcome with uneasiness, like opening his door was a huge mistake. These kids just stare at him, and he notices their eyes have really big irises and dilated pupils. He can't even see the whites of their eyes, so he figures that they have to be wearing like black contact lenses or something. He stands there frozen, just holding the candy bowl. As much as he wants to, he can't even slam the door in their faces. So he nervously tries to smile at them, hoping that they'll break character and ask for candy or something. Then the younger one says,
"We're lost. We need to come in and use your phone."
That's when Jason closes the door more than halfway on them, saying, "Nope, sorry." The older one then says,
"Can we just wait in your house until our parents come get us?"
But by now, Jason's convinced that his life is in danger somehow, and that these kids must be high on something or intending to rob him. And he just keeps mumbling, "No, sorry, good night," as he inches the door closed and locks it. At this point, Jason is terrified that these kids are going to try to break in through one of his windows or something. He looks through the peephole in his front door and watches them turn to leave. Jason lets all the air out of his lungs that he didn't even know he was holding and goes back to watching TV, but turns the volume really low so he can hear any sounds at all. He stays up till like 5 a.m. because he's too scared to go to bed and drop his guard. Fast forward almost a year later, Jason runs into his neighbor. We're going to call her Margaret. Margaret says, "You better get busy on your Halloween decorations or that guy down the street's going to beat you this year." Jason tells Margaret, "I'm skipping the decorations this year. I'm just going to put some candy out front." Margaret can't believe what she's hearing. She knows Jason loves Halloween, and so she can't help but ask, "What's the deal?" Now, Jason hadn't told anybody about what had happened last year, and he was kind of anxious actually to get it off his chest. So he opens up and tells Margaret everything that happened last Halloween, telling her the entire story of the strange and creepy kids. Margaret's first thought is that Jason is being Jason and trying to scare her because everybody in the entire neighborhood knows he's the Halloween guy. So she looks at Jason skeptically and, trying not to seem too gullible, says, "Man, that is a really crazy story. Sounds like the Black-Eyed Kids." Jason, who's never heard of Black-Eyed Kids before this conversation, just looks at her blankly and says, "The what? Is that a movie or something?" Margaret says no and tells Jason to just go look it up online. About an hour later, Margaret gets a knock on her door. It spooks her a bit now that she's got demon kids on the brain. She opens the door and finds Jason standing there, but his eyes are freaking huge. He did what she said and Googled Black-Eyed Kids, and now he's standing at her door, obviously shaken and looking really pale. Jason swears to her up and down that he has never heard of the Black-Eyed Kids before, and says that's exactly what happened to me last Halloween. They talk a while longer, and Margaret tries to calm him down, telling him that a lot of people probably know about it. It's just an urban legend, and it was probably just a bunch of teenagers with black contacts trying to freak him out on Halloween. But Jason isn't convinced. The fear he felt was so primal, and it came over him the second he opened that door. He knows what he saw, and it wasn't trick-or-treaters. This story comes to us from Reddit user Danny Marie 1023, so we'll call her Danny for short. Danny is a general skeptic of all things paranormal, with the exception of spirits. She's had plenty of encounters over her 32 years of life to solidify her belief in the afterlife. And she absolutely concedes that her story seems totally contradictory considering her disbelief in other unexplainable phenomena. But it still happened. One evening, about 3 years ago, Danny is sitting in her car, indulging in her favorite Stevie Nicks song, having a smoke, and enjoying the solitude. As she's absorbed in her little world inside her car, two children appear out of nowhere and start heading towards her car. She thinks, wow, it's kind of late for little kids to be out and about, but okay. Expecting them to just merely pass by, she is surprised when they start to approach her driver's side window. Danny finds it a bit creepy, but manageable. She decides to get out of her car instead of rolling down her window. In her head, not only is it just a little less impolite, but she also wants to be closer to her home's front door just in case things escalate. And escalate they do. As Danny gets out, one of the kids, a little girl about 6, asks,
"Why are you leaving your car?"
Danny says, "Because I'm heading in the house for the night. Are you guys okay?" The children respond in unison,
"No, we're scared."
The other kid, a little boy, then asks if they can sit in her car until their parents arrive. His request kind of confuses Danny. Where are this kid's parents, and why aren't they here yet? She asks where they live, and they reply,
"Down the road."
Danny says, "You know, guys, it's getting pretty late. You should probably head home." At that moment, the children look up at her simultaneously, and she notices their eyes for the first time. Eyes that she's never seen before. Dark, profoundly dark, and cold. An uncomfortable chill seizes her, the kind of feeling that sets her fight or flight response into action. Danny knows she needs to get some space between her and these kids now. She tells them, "I'm heading in the house now." And the little girl asks,
"May we come in?"
Of course, Danny refuses. The previously polite children now seem to emit an almost annoyed and angry vibe. Once again, she advises them to go home and promises that once she's inside, she'll call the police to help them get home safely. She says goodbye and moves toward her front door, but the children follow her. Danny thinks, all right, that's enough. These kids are not getting inside my house. They both start muttering something unintelligible, something that doesn't sound friendly. She manages to get inside and lock the door, but then the knocking starts. She thinks, wow, these kids really don't know how to take a hint, but she stands her ground and does not answer the door. Instead, she calls her boyfriend and explains the whole unnerving situation. And although he is a wee bit skeptical, he agrees to come over and spend the night so she can feel more secure. Eventually, the insistent children disappear, returning to wherever they'd mysteriously emerged from. Danny hasn't encountered these black-eyed children since that night, and she really hopes she never will again. But she remains on alert, her senses heightened, and her skepticism put on the back burner. She hopes they found their way home that night and that their unnaturally dark, cold eyes aren't haunting somebody else's life. Despite her previous non-belief in many things, this experience has undeniably shifted her perspective, and she feels compelled to share her story, hoping somebody else out there might be able to validate her experience. She can't possibly be the only one, right?